You're listening to the Shared Security Podcast with Tom Eston and Scott Wright, exploring the trust you put in people, apps, and technology.
Hosted by Scott Wright, the Streetwise Security Coach, and Tom Eston, penetration tester and ethical hacker. And sponsored by Security Perspectives, your source for tailored security awareness training and assessment solutions. We bring you stories, advice, and tips to help you make better risk decisions because nobody else can make them for you.
Episode 60 for February 1st, 2017. Why you should start shopping for a secure messaging app and what to look for.
Hello, and welcome to the Shared Security Podcast.
Alexa, play the Shared Security Podcast.
You'd like to play the program called Shared Security, right?
Yes.
Shared Security. Getting the latest episode. Here it is from TuneIn.
You're listening to the Shared Security Podcast.
Wow, that's cool.
Yeah. This is the future.
Sorry to everybody who has no clue what's going on there, but
Alexa, stop.
Downed girl. Well, let's maybe take a moment to explain what you were just doing, Tom.
Yes, our podcast now is on TuneIn, which is what Amazon Echo uses to, if you want to play a podcast or play different types of shows. So we are now on Amazon Echo, so you can now ask Alexa to play the podcast if you own one of those devices.
That is very cool.
It is.
And I think we are sort of in the stratosphere. We're in the elite of the security podcasts that are in that realm, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. I like to play with that a little bit more and see, if when you query security news, if, we come up, maybe the other podcast as well. There's one other podcast about security that's on TuneIn right now. So we're cornering the market.
Yes. We're going to take over the world.
Right.
Well, anyway, I guess all that fun, it's just too much. But anyway, back to our regularly scheduled program. It's Scott Wright here with Tom Eston. We're the dynamic duo of cybersecurity. I guess we can say that because, well, it's our podcast after all. So, and I actually Googled it, the dynamic duo of cybersecurity. The only thing that came up was HR and IT.
Oh, that's very sad.
And I don't think they're going to sue us. So I think we can.
No.
So how are you doing, Tom?
I'm doing great. Trying to stay warm here in cold Cleveland, Ohio.
Oh, yeah. How are the crowds there?
Oh, the crowds, yeah, they're just, they're light today, actually.
You guys have a lot of, big crowd things going on, over the last several months, right? You had, you had all the conventions over the last year and sports stuff. Your sports teams are doing well. And
yeah, World Series. The championship for the NBA. We beat Toronto a few times. Yeah, exactly.
It's okay. I don't live in Toronto.
No, that's true.
Although I cheer for them sometimes.
Yeah, that's like
especially if they're going
country,
against Cleveland. But
in terms of Canada, isn't Toronto just like a separate? That's Ontario, right? So that's like a different country altogether, isn't it?
Well, it's just a big megalopolis. You can't tell between, as you leave Ottawa, you're pretty much in Toronto, but.
Oh, got it. Okay.
Never mind all the trees and moose that you see on the way, but anyway.
Yes.
Okay, so, what we're going to do today is, actually, but maybe before we get into our main topic, which is going to be secure messaging apps. We do this once in a while, right? We dig deep into something, as only we can, really. I thought we might just take a couple of moments at the beginning and sort of reintroduce ourselves for people who might have not heard us talk about ourselves for a while. But we won't make people suffer too long. Just a quick blurb about what we each do, where we come from, things like that.
Sure. Yeah, that sounds good. You
want to go first?
Yeah, I'll go first. Sure. My name's Tom Eston. I am, in my day job, I am the manager of penetration testing for Veracode, which is an application security company. And I have a background, pretty long background in IT and security. have had a lot of different roles, but a lot of that was around ethical hacking and penetration testing. So I bring an interesting perspective from the attacker or the hacker point of view for our topics.
Excellent. That's great. And I'm Scott Wright. I call myself the Streetwise Security Coach. I don't think anybody else does, but anyway, that's one of my little things. TM, yeah. But my background is I'm actually an electrical engineer by training with a master's in business. But over the last 15 years or so, I've been doing security consulting for public and private sector, things like IT, security, architecture, risk management, policy. But in the last 5 years or so, my focus has really been on security awareness education, and mostly because as I went through my technical projects, I saw we could build lots of great secure things, but usually they didn't get deployed properly or people didn't use them properly, and it's mostly because people don't understand why security is important. Thus, the podcast that Tom and I started to try and help people understand why security is important. And that sort of is what we've been doing for the last, 7 years, since 2009?
Yeah, it's been that long.
Yep.
It's crazy.
And how many times have we met in that time?
None. This is all virtual.
It's all virtual. I'm not even sure Tom really exists, but I play along.
That's right. And I don't know if Scott exists, so we're... Yeah.
Actually, you know what? You were in Canada not long ago, and you should have called. You know, I would have driven 3 hours to meet you for the first time in 7 years. But hey,
there's no cell phone access where we were at, way out there.
Somewhere there was after you crossed the border. We do have cell phones.
You do in Canada? No way.
We do. Yeah.
Wow.
Oh well. Okay. Well, let's dive into our topic. How are we going to define the scope of our topic today, Tom?
Yeah, so we wanted to focus on secure messaging apps. And just recently, this is outside of the United States, because there's all kinds of fun stuff going on in the United States, but with the election and new president and everything. But this has been just a hot topic.
I hadn't heard.
Just in the last... Yeah, there was an election.
Okay.
Your neighbor.
How'd it go?
It's going. So, but regardless of the election, there's a topic about, secure communication and privacy have really just been on everybody's minds. I've gotten asked by several people, just friends and family, concerned about, are the messages that I'm sending on my phone or on my desktop, Facebook Messenger, all these different messaging systems. And the concern is, can anybody read those from, state-sponsored governments or organizations, from hackers to ISPs, the phone company and everybody in between. So we kind of just want to...
intentionally and accidentally, right?
That's correct. Yeah. So because it's on everybody's mind, we thought we'd maybe dig into, what secure messaging is and who are the players and how do they work and do they really keep your messages private and secure?
Excellent. So you could just start drawing on the board now and show us how it works.
On our virtual whiteboard, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of just a start. So there's a lot of talk recently about these apps, mainly the big ones that you might hear about. Facebook Messenger for one, WhatsApp is another very popular messaging application. Many of you may actually use it. In fact, I was looking up some stats, and WhatsApp actually has over 1 billion users apparently. So that would be kind of like apparently the number one messaging app in the world is WhatsApp.
But were they not bought by Facebook?
I don't know if they were bought by Facebook.
Or invested in, I guess. Maybe.
They may have an investment in, but I believe they are their own entity, which is interesting. And then there's been some newer players, or not so newer players. Signal is the one that kind of has a reputation for being the most secure application, as well as a new player to the game called Wire, which was recently came out just late last year. So, and of course, there's a whole handful of other apps. Google has a messaging app. A lot of the big major, if you remember, Yahoo Messenger is another one.
Yep.
Most of the big internet companies have their own messaging service. But we wanted to focus in on the ones that promote security and privacy. and what does that mean to you when, if you're using these applications, and maybe some reasons why you should start using applications that are more secure.
All right. So why should we use them?
Well, Scott, there are a few reasons, mainly because, in the news, you've probably read a lot about or seen news, not fake news, but real news about sponsored, state-sponsored governments that are using that information or collecting a lot of that information. They may be getting from ISPs, so big phone companies like AT&T or Verizon, through court order or through other methods are getting this information. And one of the interesting things that I found is that I hear from a lot of people that, hey, I don't really care about that because I'm not doing anything wrong. I mean, you can look at my text messages. I don't got anything bad in there. I'm not saying anything against the government or, doing anything wrong. I'm just like messaging my kids, like, when are you going to be home from school, and, silly things like that. Right. But what is a little more interesting these days, if you look at the different laws and things that have come out from governments, and not just the United States, but other governments as well, it's easy to get wrapped up into some potential investigations just because you may be associated to someone that may be part of another investigation because maybe they have associations with people that might be under investigation. And so I've heard that. Exactly. So I had talked to someone that works in the government here in the United States about just how these investigations work. And the information that they provided me was essentially that when they're doing an investigation, whether that be terrorist related or not, just depending on the situation, they usually look at people who they are connected to through like social media or through their connections, just through doing their own research. And sometimes, even if you didn't do anything, you may be associated just inadvertently with some of these people, your friends that may be part of an investigation, and you just happen to be part of that investigation now as well. I'm not saying that happens all the time, right? I mean, the odds of this are probably very, very small,
right?
Hopefully. Right. But that's one kind of aspect that you just need to think about in this day and age where, even through a court order, the government can call your ISP and say, I need all records pertaining to this investigation and these phone numbers or these, internet records. And you could be part of that, not even willingly, but that can happen in this day and age.
Yeah. I was just going to say that it's probably causing a bit of confusion too for people because some people probably think that the messages aren't stored, but typically they are for some period of time, right?
Right. Depending on the application that you're using, you are right. This information can be stored by that provider and then just freely given out to people that are asking for that legally or illegally, right? So there's the other aspect of this of, hackers and people that are have other plans, right? You could be part of a data breach, for example,
right?
Which we hear about all the time. There's also, the things you've heard of like WikiLeaks, for example, who, where of course, we don't know where they get all of that information that they release. But in some of those sources, your data could be part of those big data dumps. That's part of a larger kind of thing that some hackers want to disclose. So, I think there are some valid concerns. And in this day and age, it doesn't hurt to maybe take your privacy a little bit seriously and, think about what you're sending and maybe look at the applications that you're using to send those messages.
Yeah, even if you don't have anything to hide that, you can think of,
right.
As you said, you could be accidentally tied to something that's you don't want to be, if they're collecting wide swaths of information about sessions that are being held by people. Yeah.
And it kind of goes back to the conversations we've had about VPNs, right? And why that's important to use a VPN, especially if you're over like a public Wi-Fi network or, ensuring when you're browsing the web, you're using, that one plugin I think we talked about, HTTPS Everywhere, to make sure that, all your communications are encrypted and can't easily be more easily siphoned by.
At least by the bad guys. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. So, so that's kind of the different, I'd say, use cases and things that we see for, using a secure messaging app. And thankfully, I think just over the years, there's been more choices and more of these apps are coming out. And apps like Signal, for example, which, we'll get into in a little bit more detail on how that works, but really have come a long way and in terms of ease of use and the ability to now send messages in a more secure manner.
Cool. So how will we go about comparing these things, or is that what we want to do?
Well, I don't know if we should really get into like the details of like which one has this feature and which one doesn't have this feature. Mm-hmm. And we'll have some links in the show notes if people want to dig into some of the minute details on why one app might be better than another. But the basic, in a basic sense, they have to have some type of secure messaging protocol that's being used. And most of them, what I find ironic is a lot of them are actually using Signal's method of doing that. So they have their own encrypted protocol based on public key cryptography, which is well known and tested and accepted. They use that protocol for sending and receiving messages. And so apps like WhatsApp have actually integrated Signal's technology into their application, and they're using that for the encryption and the privacy aspects, which I think is great because one thing about Signal is that their application is open source. So security researchers, anybody in the security community can actually look at the code and to make sure that it's secure, there's no backdoors, there's nothing nefarious going on, also for bug hunting and things like that. So the company that makes it is Open Whisper Systems, and we may have talked about the gentleman that runs that company, Moxie Marlinspike, who is a well-known cryptographer. That's a real guy. He's a very well-known cryptographer, has done a lot of security research in the security community over the years, and that's his company, which gets funding from grants and other types of things. So it's a private entity. It's not owned by any government or other organization. And again, the code is open source. So, they're very transparent about what they do. And their app is free. So there's nothing that you have to pay to use the application.
So what else is interesting about these things? Anything else we want to touch on?
So there's a lot of talk too about, so what is the real privacy with these applications? Like, how do they protect your privacy? Well, first, there's end-to-end encryption, right? So we have kind of the over-the-wire security piece taken care of, so someone can't just sniff those messages, or an ISP can't grab those messages because they're not stored on a particular server. They're actually stored on your device. So when you're sending a message, information is encrypted and it's stored on individual devices versus like a cloud-based, server or somewhere out there on the internet, which is really nice.
It's very important, yeah.
Which is important. The other thing too is that they provide a way to verify your identity. So Scott, I thought it was interesting. We were kind of playing around with Signal the last couple days, and you had asked, how do I know this is Tom Eston? How do I know that your device isn't compromised?
I get this message out of the blue after I installed my Signal app, and it's from a phone number. And I'm going, to me, that looks like a UK phone number, but it's talking about doing this on the podcast. So maybe somebody's just trying to pull my leg. So I thought I'd test them and see what their knowledge was.
Right, exactly. So what I did was I sent Scott a series of codes that was part of our communication, essentially, that Scott could use to verify that I have the same codes on my end. So, I could have emailed him or called him over the phone and said, hey, verify that it's me. If you're actually in person, they give you a QR code that you can scan to basically match up the conversations. So there are ways. It is. So if you really are concerned that, are you really talking to the person you're supposed to be talking to, they do have ways now of verifying that, which is really nice.
How easy do you think it would be if you didn't have that? How easy would it be for someone to set up, a man in the middle or do something from an impersonation point of view?
It would be very, very difficult unless, of course, you lost your device, which gets back to one of the concerns, right, with using any of these applications is kind of the physical security aspect, right? So if you lose control of your device or don't have it secured with a good passcode, for example, there is a possibility that someone would go into Signal and start sending messages as you. That's the case with your email or with anything else, right? So one of the recommendations that I would have is, think about how you secure your mobile device that you're using applications like this. Getting back to things we've talked about in the podcast before about having a strong passcode, having a procedure if you do lose your device, using apps like, Find My Phone, ensuring the device is erased or wiped, I think is critical because, to your point, Scott, anybody could impersonate you at that point if they can break into your phone.
Yep. And I don't know if you remember a few years ago when Edward Snowden was making his escape, he used a messaging system at that time that was probably the only one that was secure, right? Off the record, I think it was he was using.
Yes. Yep.
And if you read or see any of the stories about the process, it was pretty painstaking. He was trying to get the reporters he was trying to share this information with who didn't know him at all, trying to get them to trust him and to set up some kind of an encrypted channel for him to report to them without being caught.
Yeah, exactly. So, there's things to consider. The other privacy concern I would be aware of with any of these applications is that someone on the other end that you're communicating with can, screenshot a conversation with their phone or take a picture of it with another camera, right? To save that information. So there's all these applications have what we call, disappearing messages. So you can have that setting enabled where after you read the message, it just disappears and it's deleted. That doesn't help very much from an archive perspective. If you needed to go back and say, hey, what did my friend say 2 weeks ago? Where am I supposed to meet him? That kind of thing. But that feature is enabled. But just keep in mind, if you're having an ultra, secret conversation, hopefully you're trusting that person on that other end that's not going to screenshot information or pictures, other things like that may be private. You always have to trust the person on the other end.
Right. Yeah. So I think that's a good survey of the the features and functions of these tools that I think people should know about and probably should start using. Not, as I said, not because they have anything to hide, but just because it's a more reliable way of communicating, and you just never know when you would be happy that you did.
Right. So the biggest problem what I've found with these types of apps are just, you may not have all of your friends and family using these applications, which is so in terms of adoptability with the people that you want to communicate with is just not there yet. I would say the exception being WhatsApp and Facebook Messenger. Facebook Messenger, obviously, most people are on Facebook, so it's a little more common that people can send messages through that. What's challenging with Facebook Messenger is they just recently enabled what they call secret conversations, and that's something you actually have to enable with a brand new conversation. So if you already have an existing thread, maybe say with one of your friends that you've had for the last year, you can't go back and just start encrypting that conversation. You actually have to start a new conversation, enable the secret function, and then that's encrypted end to end. So most people just won't know that off the bat, right? Mm-hmm. But that's also, since everyone's using Facebook, it's very popular. So and a lot of people just didn't know that feature is now enabled. So
yeah, I think we actually talked about this a few episodes ago. We mentioned some of these capabilities, and mm-hmm. I think at the time we were talking about bots, right? The fact that sites like Facebook that host these messenger services want to use the data that you, the content of your messages to try and help you, right? Help you with your responses. They might try and predict what you want to say, save you some time. And they can only do that if it's not encrypted. So when you turn on that feature that makes your Facebook Messenger messages secure, Facebook theoretically can't see those messages anymore if they're keeping to their word. And they therefore can't help you. They can't see. They can't use any of the data that you might have entered. So they probably don't want you to do that all the time, and they probably don't want to enable it by default.
Yep. Yeah. The Google messaging app, which I think has come out by now, it's called Allo, which is their supposedly secure messaging app. They actually disabled end-to-end encryption because they have some AI that does exactly what you just described, Scott. Was, it wants to learn through machine learning what you're talking about and offer suggestions and offer instant directions if it senses that you're talking about you're going someplace. Those messages can't be encrypted. So it provides some challenges for newer AI type technology that's coming out, and how do you secure that, right?
Yeah. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how the market evolves, but I believe it'll probably kind of like how websites are now almost all going to SSL for the same reasons, right?
Yeah.
You want to be able to trust who you're talking to at the other end, and you want that information to be shared privately, more or less. So I suspect they'll probably move towards that, except for the pressures of the machine learning side.
Right, exactly. And really the last point I'd make is, each of these applications has different features and functionality that may be a little more advantageous for you. So, for example, Wire, they will do, you can do like group chats, you can do audio and video, which is newer. Signal only has audio, so you can actually make a phone call, an encrypted phone call with Signal, or you can just send encrypted chats. Wire has a little bit more functionality with like group texts, even though Signal has group text as well. But the video calling is something that's still popular, and so Wire has that ability, and I'm sure Signal will probably catch up to that as well. But those are kind of some of the there's different features for each, but and of course the user base, right? So Signal and Wire don't have as big as a user base as, say, Facebook Messenger and WhatsApp. So if you want to start using these applications, it's kind of on you to enlist your friends and family to start using them as well, and kind of spread the word of the benefits of doing that.
Yeah, it's interesting when you talk about video capability. Do you expect that because it's secured, would that degrade the video quality or bandwidth at all, do you think?
I don't think so these days with, the high bandwidth that most of us have either at home or just available through our devices. I'd say maybe 10 years ago that probably would have been a problem, but everybody's running here, super high speed internet these days. Encryption really isn't much overhead anymore.
Yeah, I think a lot of it's done in hardware now, especially for session encryption. So I didn't expect there to be a big problem, but just thought I'd ask.
Exactly. Yep. So cool stuff. But yeah, we'll have lots of some links if you're interested in learning more about these the different applications that we've talked about. We'll provide some kind of pros and cons and some good articles if you're interested in using those. And of course, our advice is, definitely, if you can, encourage yourself and your friends and family to start using more secure methods of communication.
Excellent. Great advice. And we hope people will take it.
Yep.
So, is that it for today?
If you wanted to talk about Canada's Privacy Day.
Well, it wasn't actually Canada's Privacy Day. I have to.
Bummer.
Yeah, I have to sort of admit, like Tom was building it up to me, like, hey, Canada had this special Privacy Day. It was actually International Privacy Day.
Oh, bummer! I thought it was just a special thing for Canada.
No, I don't know where you got that idea, but. Yeah, it's good. I mean, it's good. We actually do have, a pretty good reputation for privacy.
You do,
as far as legislation and general expertise here. So, I guess the article we're going to link to in the show notes just talks about sort of reflection on privacy. It was on Privacy Day, and they were asking Anne Cavoukian, who is actually the former Privacy Commissioner for the province of Ontario. And she's actually quite an interesting person. I follow her on Twitter. She's got lots of good insights, and I get a lot of news and retweets from her that where I learn things and try to comment as well. But the article we're linking to just sort of she points out, as we have kind of in a couple of past episodes, one of her main privacy concerns to reflect on is the amount of data being gathered by manufacturers of smart devices and software application developers. As we just talked about, some of the newer technologies, there's so much data flying around that there's a lot of excitement about all the things we can do with it, but not so much attention being paid to the methods of collection, the consent, the protection for that information from the privacy principles that we try to follow. So it was a good article that she had some really good comments in that about it in general. So I tend to follow that too. But as for Data Privacy Day, we had it was good. We had a magician and a juggler and a bouncy castle. Lots of fun.
Was the juggler secure though?
Yeah, as far as I could tell, he was inside a box.
Oh, that's pretty secure.
So yeah, I mean, I think generally a lot of the people in Canada that speak on privacy are very well respected. So I tend to follow them a lot. And, but the other thing that they mentioned in the article too was that traditionally a lot of the cases that the Canadian Privacy Commissioner and the Ontario one, I imagine too, that they take on are not necessarily indicative of all of the problems that we may see with small businesses, because there are a lot of them are dealing with larger enterprises, banks and insurance companies and things like that. So there's a concern about how much knowledge small businesses tend to have about what they should be doing with private information, for example. So that's something we're going to probably see more attention paid to in the future.
Yeah, we should probably link to the interview one of the only interviews we did. No, we've done a few of the Privacy Commissioner.
We did two. Yeah,
office.
We did one in our first year and one last year. So that was about a year ago, actually, our 51st episode. I remember that well. We were trying to get him for the 50th as a celebration, but it was the 51st anyway.
Yeah.
And actually, one thing that I just saw on Twitter, and Kavukian is tweeting about, was that we need to educate people more about the issue of backdoors, which, if you're not familiar with, it's the methods that governments are starting to use to force software and device manufacturers to allow access by law enforcement, at least. And it's a tricky topic, right? We could probably spend a whole episode talking about that.
Yeah. Everyone probably remembers we may have touched on this in the podcast when Apple.
Yeah, the Apple versus FBI.
Yeah, that was a very hot topic where the FBI was just like, you should just build in this back door so we don't have to, decrypt the device and go through all this trouble. So very scary.
Yeah,
indeed.
I sort of have my way of characterizing backdoors as politically attractive, theoretically easy, inherently exploitable.
Yeah.
Similar to nuclear waste in terms of our desirability for society.
That's right. And the danger with backdoors too is, what if it's somebody else besides the government that finds that backdoor and decides to use it as well?
Absolutely, and it's almost inevitable, because once the state has the power to enforce them, the bad guys are going to expect that there will be backdoors, and they're going to look for them, and they're going to find them because they're impossible to hide. So
that's right. That's right. Another, so that's a good shout out to applications like Signal, right, that are open source, where you can view the code and you make sure that there are no backdoors. So one of the reasons I love open source.
Good stuff. All right. So I guess that's probably enough for today.
Yeah.
And
excellent.
Want to thank everybody for listening. We should probably give the feedback contact information.
Yep, you can send us an email at feedback@sharedsecurity.net. You can also find us on Facebook and Twitter. In fact, Facebook, we probably post. I mean, there's a lot that we post on Facebook, which actually gets linked into our Twitter. So, if you click on one of our links, which are safe, by the way, you can click on our links. Nothing malicious. We'll take you to our Facebook page, and then you can, hopefully dig into some of the, hopefully get some conversations going with some of the articles that we're sharing. So I'd encourage our our audience to do that as well. And maybe we could talk about some of those comments and your feedback on the podcast.
Yeah, that would be excellent. It's an easy way to contribute. Or if you're old school, you can call us and leave a voicemail at 613-693-0997. And we will mention you on the show. So I guess that's all for today. And so once again, until next time, thanks very much, everybody, and we'll talk to you later.
Thanks for listening.